All countries in the world are drowning in debt. The United States owes $38 trillion. Japan owes $9 trillion. Globally, total debt has reached $315 trillion, more than 3 times the size of the entire world economy. But the question that should truly concern you is this. If everyone is in debt, who are they indebted to? Because when you follow the creditor chain, when you trace who actually holds this debt, you encounter something deeply unsettling. The world is not really indebted to a specific group or nation. The world is indebted to itself. And yet, this system did not form by accident. Over 3 centuries, 4 key figures introduced solutions to different financial problems that permanently changed how debt works. Individually, each of them made sense, but together they created a system in which debt was never meant to disappear. This is not a conspiracy. Meetings took place. Institutions still exist. The mechanisms are documented in public records. And when you understand how this system was built, you realize something critical. $38 trillion is not a crisis to be solved. It is the system working exactly as it was designed to. Let me show you how. The world before permanent debt. Before 1694, governments borrowed money the old-fashioned way. Kings went to merchants or nobles. They borrowed gold. They promised to repay it with interest. And if they couldn't pay, they defaulted. Creditors lost money. Kings lost credibility. The system cleaned itself. Debt was temporary. It was either repaid or erased. It was risky, complicated, and limited. That limitation was about to disappear. The first architect, William Paterson, 1694. England was at war with France. The treasury was empty. Taxes did not cover expenses. Traditional lenders no longer trusted the crown. At this point, William Paterson proposed a radical idea. He would rally a group of merchants to lend the government £1.2 million, an enormous sum for the time. But the real innovation was this. The principal would never be repaid. Instead, the government would pay interest forever. To manage this arrangement, Paterson proposed the creation of a new institution, the Bank of England. The structure was simple yet revolutionary. Merchants deposited gold. The bank lent that gold to the government. The government paid interest from tax revenue. The bank distributed that interest to the merchants, and the principal, permanent. Why would anyone accept this? Because the interest payments were guaranteed by Parliament. As long as England could tax its citizens, the payments would continue. For the first time in history, national debt stopped being a temporary burden. It became a permanent feature, and more importantly, debt itself became money. Banknotes were issued against government debt. Debt was no longer just something to be repaid. It entered circulation. Why this changed everything for the government? This solved a crisis. For lenders, it created something unprecedented, a permanent income stream guaranteed by a nation. Governments could roll debt indefinitely. Bankers could collect interest forever. Within decades, every major European power copied the model. Permanent debt became normalized, but it was still fragile. Governments could still, in theory, default. That problem would soon be solved. The second architect, Nathan Rothschild, 1815. In the early 1800s, governments were borrowing constantly, especially for wars. But debt markets were chaotic. Loans were negotiated privately. Information moved slowly. And default was always possible. Nathan Rothschild changed that. Through a pan-European international banking network, the Rothschild family gained unprecedented control over capital flows. Their real innovation wasn't lending money, it was making government debt widely tradable. Bonds could be bought, sold, used as collateral, and transferred across borders. A single government bond could pass through dozens of institutions in different countries. This changed the meaning of default. When a government stopped paying, it wasn't just breaking a promise to one creditor. It was risking the collapse of the entire financial network. Debt became too interconnected to fail. From that point on, governments were not merely encouraged to pay, they were forced to. The third architect, J.P. Morgan, 1913. In the United States, financial power was still fragmented. Banks operated independently. The money supply was limited. Debt had boundaries. That changed after the Panic of 1907. J.P. Morgan personally organized a private bailout and proved something crucial. The system needed a central mechanism, but Americans hated central banks, so Morgan and his partners designed a central bank that didn't look like one. The Federal Reserve System appeared decentralized and public from the outside. In practice, it guaranteed that government debt would always have a buyer. The Federal Reserve could create money to purchase government bonds. From that moment on, the limit disappeared. The government could always borrow more. Debt became effectively infinite. The fourth architect, Paul Volcker, 1982. By the late 20th century, the system faced a new problem. Some countries could no longer repay their debts. Normally, this would mean default and losses for lenders. Volcker's solution was different. When debt became unpayable, it was not forgiven. It was restructured. International institutions stepped in, providing just enough credit to keep interest payments flowing in exchange for economic control. Debt stopped being purely a financial issue. It became a political tool. Countries were kept permanently indebted within the system, but never allowed to collapse. The system today combined the four innovations: permanent debt, global tradability, unlimited money creation, no exit through default. What is the result? $315 trillion in global debt. None of it will ever be fully repaid. All of it generates interest, and that interest flows upward, from workers and taxpayers to the institutions holding the bonds. This is not a mistake. This is the game itself. Final thought. Every generation is taught that government debt is a problem to be solved, but the architects of this system understood something very different. Debt is not a flaw. It is the mechanism, and interest is the rent we pay to live within it. If this has changed how you see government debt, if you now understand why these numbers never go down, then you are beginning to see how power truly works. If you want to understand the system not as it is taught in textbooks, but as it actually exists, subscribe, because debt is no longer temporary, it is permanent.